Rattled, but moving on. Um, you, A.V. Marraccini, you are an art historian, essayist, and critic residing in London. You were just awarded an Emerging Critics Fellowship from the National Book Critics Circle. You regularly contribute a column to Firmament called Object Crushes. We just announced your debut book, We the Parasites, is going to be out next fall from Sublunary Editions. It is called an essay. I guess that would be.
Yeah, I mean
Right.
it's a book. I say book length essay because when we say essay, people think 5 paragraphs English class. So it's an
Yeah.
essay.
Um, so I would call it, yeah, a collage like essay. Idea of inhabiting other bodies through criticism of queerness and the eroticism of knowledge. Yeah, that is how I would describe it. But let's start with something from Object Crushes, because this is the genesis of, I guess, our creative collaboration was inviting you to do a column for Firmament. So a few people might have this new issue, but I think this will be new for a lot of folks. So please favor us.
Okay, so Object Crushes was originally nonfiction. I wrote the first one about. Why is there someone talking on one of the small screens? That is very sorry, very distracting. Um, mm, yeah, okay, gonna not look at those. Okay, so Object Crushes was originally supposed to be nonfiction, but I was really interested both in antiquarian histories of like deep classical Greece and also some weird science fiction stuff that I had been reading. So this Object Crushes, which is kind of a preview for the upcoming Firmament, is very experimental and rides the sort of fiction, nonfiction line. It was a little bit inspired by Procopius's Byzantine secret history, and there are a lot of footnotes. So when you hear me read and you hear me say footnote, um, that is in fact a footnote from the original text. So it's hard to get a visual sense for the page, but I promise it is also printed in almost Murex red purple in the issue, which you will love if you see it. So this object crush is called Murex futures. There are several species of Murex, but the one that makes the dye in the story you think you know is one of the species, footnote, Bolinaris brandaris, mainly, but when the sea worlds were seeded and Kepler 22b was the first amongst them to accede to imperial experiment, the records kept do not indicate if this was the Earth species originally or some other, deigned by on high to produce the correct purple, comma, that lived in the eastern Mediterranean near Tyre. The first of the sea worlds was named New Tyre, and then New Byblos and New Carthage followed, though the attention of these names to history rather than the poetic gesture. Footnote. A newer Herodotus, speaking in argot of deep space-bound Persian and Greek that has 5 genders, 15 cases, and retains an optative merely to spite the gods, would argue that history is often itself poetic gesture, is dubious. The great imperial barges slung low and stately into orbit and then sprung hovering spiny masts as they floated just above the ocean, on schedule every 150 local orbital years. Footnote. Whether you asked a new Phoenician or an old Phoenician, the answer that the mucosal glands of the shell, rather than its elegant exterior, produced the fabled dye, was not terribly pleasing to the imperial observers. They were not there to collect the harvest, per se, merely to sample and celebrate it. It was, after all, the year of an imperial birth. In Byzantium, the heirs of the emperor were said to be born in the purple, for the dark red purple stone, porphyry, that lined their chambers. Even in the new worlds of the Imperium, vast and individually specialized as they were, there was only one mine of porphyry on a desolate, toxic-aired moon, which was summarily heavily guarded. The heir had been born, footnote. Forgive me here for retaining the style of the old historians, from whom we all learn at the Pharaoh stations. It is a scholar's tick. By born, I mean the nicety of slitting the cryo-sac of embryonic development at the exact right moment, traditionally when the ship is going faster than light. The heir had been born inside the room of requisite stone, which looks like the void of the heavens, and then summarily presented mewling to the view of the heavens themselves, each star cluster a prescient white glare and eyes entirely new to the light. Ah, the eyes. There is the reason that the purple of new Tyre is sometimes called red. It is a dark red, like clotting blood. It does not take a historian to know what every citizen of the sea world knows, what every last muttering oarsman on every deep space rack speculates about endlessly over knuckle bones. But no. Since the edict banning human ones was passed several emperors ago, all knuckle bones are decreed to be vat grown and porcine, but this is not indeed the case if one looks closely. If one heir puts out another heir's eyes, the one without eyes cannot become emperor. Of course, the imperials have replacements. It is a matter of the spiritual, apparently. So the ones with their eyes put out and then put in again when the new ones are installed are chucked through the portways and wormholes into the furthest edges of space, where they do the grunt work of imperial duties, like blessing the Murex harvest. It is not a bad job, as jobs go. I was to the rear of the retinue. This heir was strange, having chosen not to replace the eyes, instead furnishing the blank sockets with two black orbs of glass with their ashes inside. 6. Footnote. It is likely that this is an elaborate courtly metaphor in the tradition of the body books, but as scholars of my caste are not trained to read the inscriptions on the Imperium's body and might only accompany the retinue as observers, this is a speculative guess. His hair was long and scraggly, but the fine purple of his cloak was visible to all the surrounding ships, piled with the inhabitants of the planet, who would likely tell their children's children that they had a precise and splendid view. Footnote. No one knew at this time, of course, that in the heart of the empire the throne was already being contested, that indeed a hauler from one of the other water worlds, New Sidon, had risen up with her crew at the Sacral docks on the back side of the main port platform in the city, and was presently fighting her way, ultimately futilely, to the physical seat of the throne. The ballads of this often align the fact that the two events, though contemporaneous, were indeed enacted in ignorance of each other. He took a sample shell, perfectly clean and intact, from the trembling hand of the provincial governor and held it to his ear. The whole barge went silent. Very suddenly, he laughed and gestured for me. As I made my way to the prow, he shouted, "Listen, Procopius. If you put it to your ear, you can hear the sea's alphabet." Footnote. If you think by this that I must be your father's or your grandmother's tutor's descendant, might I remind you that the second we emerge from the vats, we scholars are called Procopius. It is much a rank as a name. Should I have chosen for myself, I might have selected Plinius Secundus. I thought of this for many years afterward. Of course, given the events of the attempt in the city originating in New Sidon, and the speculation that he had propitiously engineered a visit to a sea world at the very time, this heir did not last long. They put his glass orbs in the sockets of the skull eyes in the catacombs below, to float with his other bones on the coin for the ferryman. Footnote. One new obol, to cross the event horizon of the supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy, but carefully and intentionally, no second obol for a potential ride back. The coin for the ferryman in its numbered chamber. One should never get too attached to them. Heirs. I know many alphabets from the many worlds, some documented, others the secrets of cults of dead gods, others never spoken by more than a single man. But I have yet still to find the sea's alphabet. So this is the story that I tell you when you ask me what one might say of the history of the Murex. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. So we asked you kind of out of the blue if you might be interested in doing a column for Firmament, and the idea of object crushes seemed to come to you pretty naturally. Was that something? I mean, I know you, like all of us, have your obsessions, but was this idea something that was already kind of in your mind, something you wanted to explore more or do in another form?
Well, yeah, I mean, since you have so kindly informed me I'm an art historian, I feel the need to sort of say that involves suspended, like extended periods of time. with research and close looking at objects. And some art historians like to be really distant and sort of pseudo-objective about their objects, but I sort of fall in love. And I do this with lots of objects in my life, and it's my sort of natural mode of interacting with the material world. And I like to see criticism, literary criticism, but also criticism as form, as a kind of extension of this material infatuation. So for me, really seeing a thing is a form of love and attention. And so they were crushes in the sense that these were objects I had infatuations with at the time I wrote the pieces.
So we also mentioned, or I also informed you, as well as our esteemed viewers, that you recently were awarded an Emerging Critics Fellowship from the National Book Critics Circle. So what did that mean to you, both, I guess, in terms of the, I would say validation, but the act of like receiving it, but also like what does this mean for you in terms of what will it allow you to work on over the next year?
So obviously, I'm thrilled to receive it on a personal and professional level. But being a critic is often lonely work, and I got to meet the other emerging critics last night, and they were so impressive and sort of intriguing and fun as people. So on one sense, it'll just be this community to reach out with about questions. But another thing I want to do, I'll be writing a fiction review for Kirkus as part of the fellowship, and also for the Critical Mass blog that the NBCC creates. But I would like to start writing. So Firmament is one of the only places I write in the U.S. Despite being an American by origin, an acquired second citizen of the EU, and a resident of Britain. I am American. I grew up in Miami, Florida, and I would like to write more in the American sphere. So this fellowship will hopefully allow me to exist in both worlds across the Atlantic, I think. So yeah, I'm super excited about it, and it's very new to me.
So as a critic, I think what drew me to your book was the sort of central metaphor of the critic as parasite. And it's not, you would think that would be almost a little self-flagellating, but I think it nicely gets across the idea that just as there are very few truly symbiotic relationships, there are also very few truly parasitic relationships in the sense of having no benefit whatsoever to the host. It's varying degrees uncomfortable, but potentially necessary not only to the ecosystem of art and criticism, but of the furthering of the work itself. It's not all fig wasps and tapeworms. It is I think a more more nuanced book than that. But what sort of what made you feel as if you might be a parasite of some sort?
Well, I first want to give fig wasps some credits because there wouldn't be figs to eat without them. It's sort of a symbiotic relationship. And so I think when we talk about parasites and parasitism, we often don't recognize their sort of interesting aspects. For instance, like tapeworms can secrete chemicals that help tamp down the immune recognition of their presence. And those might eventually cause some cures for autoimmune disorders that we're dealing with now. So parasites are actually biologically not as simple as we might think either. And I really enjoy the gross anatomical and scientific sort of aspects of the book. And there are a lot of very visceral passages. But one of the things I was thinking about when I sort of selected the literary sources for this book was how, in some ways, antithetical to my own personhood they were. So one of the ones I engaged with, and you'll see some references to this in this passage, is Updike's The Centaur, but also Jean Genet, who I read as a teenager and then came back to for this. And in this passage, Genet talks about theft, but the way Genet talks about theft is very erotic. And I was trying to consider what the difference between criticism and theft is, just as I wanted to consider what the benefits of being a parasite are, or being part of drawing off of an organism like art. And so this is not as visceral a passage as some of the rest of the book. But I also would like to take this chance to mention that the book is all deeply interwoven. So selecting a passage that could stand was very difficult. This one references a jewel heist that some of you might remember at the beginning of the pandemic. the Grüniskophoba in Dresden was robbed of the state jewels of Saxony, and there's this grainy video of a black and white floor, and these very small figures come in, they break their vitrines, they take the state jewels, and they leave, and it looks fake, right? You'd think it wasn't real. And so this happened when I was reading about theft in Genet and thinking about criticism and theft and their differences. So that's one of the things to look out for in this passage. Ooh, interesting compromise.
Take it away.
Right. So this is from later in the first section of the book. I've done some introductory work, and there might be a few references here. The book uses the paintings of Cy Twombly as a running way of interacting with antiquarianism and some of the feelings around criticism. So you will see a reference to the loops in Twombly's chalkboard paintings that I had discussed previously that go like this. And they sort of look like the proglottids in a tapeworm's body. And that's one of the things, the reason the poster for the book was pink, and you can see the tapeworms on it is they're stained that color of pink scientifically. So that's a fun sort of tie-in. So I'll begin here. Criticism isn't theft in Genet's way, or in any way, really. But then again, neither is parasitism. The wasp burrows into the unspent flower of the fig tree with the imperative to live. The fish louse takes the place of the tongue of the fish to survive. The tapeworm attaches to the wall of the gut for the same reason. Taste can be cultivated, the sort of eros of wanting certain things. But behind taste is the throbbing want that is perhaps closest to the parasitic Darwinian imperative. We tell ourselves stories in order to live is the kind of thing that ends up on inspirational posters for children's English classrooms. Maybe we do, but if we're critics, we feed on art not to live, but to feel the heady rush at the apex of the senses, this not exactly nice thing, this assignation of sorts. I read and I look, greedy for it. So it is like Genet's theft in that way, in that it is an art, learned through graft and hard apprenticeship and desire. The desire in theft in Genet that comes out of an excess of something and not a necessity is where it feels most like criticism or sex or both. Remember the jewel thieves in Dresden, the ones who might have been last year at Marienbad? Actually, they're not the parasites here. Again, the theft was likely commissioned. Nor is the person who wanted the state jewels of Saxony all to themselves, and crucially to no one else. When an object is custom swiped in a robbery like this, a parasite, the ultimate acquirer of the stolen diamonds isn't like the thieves, if they are Genet's thieves, or the critics, who do a thing in the world and then leave it there. If I am greedy for, say, a novel, or Bruegel's Fall of Icarus, or the piano sonatas of the younger of the Scarlattis, I don't take these things from the world. Or if I do, I take a version of them, and I put them in my Simonidean memory house, which is perhaps also a private brothel. But the Bruegel is still there, the Scarlatti, the novel, to seduce other people and other critics. Parasites want their hosts to live so that they can spread. Critics can be parasites because they don't secret away the diamonds, break the vitrines of the public museum. Tapeworms have innate in their proglottids the capacity to make an exponentially greater number of more tapeworms. Essays also make essays this way, maybe with footnotes, and reviewers make viewers, who are in a sense themselves critics. When I love someone, a person, my Nike of Salmon Thrace, I am a jealous creature. I want no one else to have her, to be in love in a singular and only return. This is not how I love that about what I write, the things with which I want to infect others, to make them also love or lust, a review bursting like a cloud of sinis, the Greek word for flies, from a gall. They sting you and you will want it, whatever I have just written about, the Twombly, or the Genet, maybe even the diamonds of Saxony. Have you bought a copy of Updike's The Centaur already? Perhaps I have infected you too. I have kissed you with another's usurped kiss of the mouth. This is criticism too, me seducing you on behalf of some dead thing bound in folio. We have a tryst when you read this. Open even the most stolid of review pages of a literary magazine or Sunday broadsheet, and I can contaminate you with my desire. The newsprint on your fingers is like the smear of lipstick I could leave on your cheek. Afterward, you see it and wonder what prompted you to this, as if my gentle bite still marks the soft nape of your neck. There is a proglotted there now, just to say, Sontag has left one in me. We all infect each other. This argot of contagion, of closeness in rooms with chessboard floors and glass-walled displays of implacable treasures. This is Genet's argot of thieves, but it is also the argot of the city, a certain kind of crowded city where people are formed into themselves as if by a greater topographical will. When I picture this city, I see a 17th century print by a man named Wenceslaus Haller. He was an immigrant to London, but this print is the Holy Land, part of an imagined set of plans, elevations, and finally a realization of the Temple of Jerusalem. Haller wants to establish the Baroque proportions of the temple's facade, but is so wildly dense, folded back onto itself, that it feels like a puzzle or a Borgesian trick instead. It's squares on squares, an endless fractal-like array that plunks rhythmically until it hits a gaping cavernous ooze at the site of the complex on the side of the page. The architecture of this Jerusalem is that of a city of the gods, but also of thieves. It is simultaneously distant, as we see it from a bird's eye view in the plan, but still you can hear thwack, thwack, thwack repeats the facade in rhythms in each nested square. Thwack, 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 loop, loop, loop. Twombly's chalkboard paintings echo here too. Not a graffiti, but a floor plan, a number of columns that approaches the uncountable or the countable only to God. Proglottids gravid with stacked eggs, extending one after the other, after the other, after the other, until they almost exceed the human scale. Perhaps this is a holy place because it is a limit of knowing, a limit of what it is possible to desire, and therefore to critique.
Thank you, Alex. So that is from We the Parasites, and I don't know if I have or not, but apologies if I've called it We Later Parasites, because I tend to just meld our books together. But We the Parasites will be out autumn of next year from Sublunary Editions. In the meantime, you can catch Alex quarterly in issues of Firmament in the Object Crushes column. Alex, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure having you.
And this is just one section of a numbered section in many numbered sections. So I look forward to exploring more of them with you in the future.
Excellent. All right, thank you. Since I had to mute everyone by default, Doug, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
And I shall.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you for so quickly acquiescing. Douglas Luman.
Because you asked so nicely, that's why.
I hit the only button that Zoom gave me. So Douglas Luman, you are an assistant professor of computer science at Allegheny College, co-founder of Container, art director at Stillhouse Press. You were the author of F-Text, which came out in 2017 from Inside the Castle, which is a series of erasures of the various accounts of Marco Polo's travels. You are most pertinent to me and the logo on my t-shirt, the author of Rationalism, which will be out in September. It is a series of poems that take as their starting points computational mistranslations of various mid-20th century Italian fascist architecture writings, demonstrating perhaps that even in the ruins of an ideology, the seeds of isolation and otherness remain viable. This is going to be great. You guys are going to love this transition. Sort of like perhaps parasites inhabiting a mangled corpse, still carrying the seeds of their ideological discontent of isolation and violence. Douglas, welcome.
Oh, thank you. No, thank you, Josh, and thank you, Vic, and everybody else for attending today, and all the other readers. I look forward to hearing more of you in this wonderful, like, multi-temporal thing we've got going on here, where like I am someone's past, and also Josh, I am your future. It's interesting to be global, I guess. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Do you want to kick us off with a little sampling of rationalism,
Sure.
and then we will discuss?
So the book is constructed from a few different short sequences that kind of take a certain form. And so if you look at the text, you'll see that there's a kind of repetition of pattern that closes itself after having I guess, 3 stanza poems, 2 stanza poems. So I think I'm going to take one of the sections from about, where am I at, the middle of the book to start thinking about it. And as Josh mentioned, this takes its mistranslation cue from a series of issues of an Italian fascist architectural magazine called Quadrante, which is I've made available in the Italian via Internet Archive. And in the afternote, and if we talk about it during our conversation, we'll talk more about how I got them. But I sort of liberated them from the Central National Library of Rome's archive. And then I share some co-authorship here with the Google Translate API, but only in the way that I made it do work for me that I still do not fully understand. So the work that you hear here is an intentional mistranslation, which I do not know Italian. I do not know exactly what these magazines say. So I have appropriated the language of fascist rhetoric, architectural rhetoric for my own purposes. So from the middle of the text, I take the following short sequence. Take in hand 2 metals, tin and knot. Which one is more equal? In such an occult ritual, you're left wondering which one is fairest, while even light steals away. If the mere idea of thievery mystifies you, any opportune distraction leaves you alone in a theater with exact capacity 1. The flaw of translating such a play into English is that every word becomes an international incident, and as in a dubbed version, something remains unsaid. The streets are all damaged. And we wonder where all the futurists have gone. You ask for a garden, you're left with the fruit. But what good comes from politics and poems? It is easy to moralize from rooftops, but what about fields, the green on the atlas functioning as some evangelical substance? Truly, no one yearns for another farmhouse, and railways propose the ultimate paradox: you can go anywhere you want. The pious most fear that which they do already, so much time spent convincing themselves of their perfect interpretations. If faced with negative numbers, do mathematicians abandon every mark of absence? Something so arbitrary as faith possesses clear ideas about what it symbolizes. It is a fool that is so hasty to help another. Like insurance, people do just enough. In the sable dark, banks assume monstrous proportions, and every one of them looks like a Gothic cathedral or Parthenon, places where you renounce everything and folks walk about, say, it belonged to us first. Possession becomes a thaumaturgical endeavor once it involves money, and if not a succession of wonders, any meaning tends to upset the bourgeois. As in Homer, little exists which is so attractive as mythical returns. But if a Ulysses finds their way home amongst the ruins, who am I to complain? If this parable requires 10 people to divine what it means, do you receive the world you're given, or should you accept other offers? If you've never experienced an omen, a metaphor using salt will signify nothing to you. However, one can easily see want in an analogy to wearing red shoes, feeling how tightly desire clings to your feet. I sat still in a room until I had no more want. While in my empty square, it occurred to me that concrete assumes significance because of its mass and creates nondescript rooms with the continuity of a regular postal address. Any countryside happens as an accident of unregulated space. And light only makes fields emerge where there's nothing to block it. Meanwhile, architects build too many buildings, and I know the only thing facing me is a wall. What about geography that creates itself from moral distinctions, at least as far as an absolute sense of what is south from here? The edge always closer than what you perceive by half. You know that such politics exist to make things ridiculous. It has a liturgical character, everyone feels like participating, and in songs without words, no one confesses to anything. There's something you put on a banner, hang outside every structure. If you take a picture, you're responsible for the whole panorama. If you sing a song, the same goes for every note. This film of soldiers lacks any originality. Spectating at a parade, the crowd applauds at appropriate times and places. The director shouts, "Discipline!" as everyone appears to disappear at a distance. Romantics confuse the figurative elements with accurate geometry. The horizon's habitual two-dimensional circle means that a vanishing point literally begins everywhere, its magic making all objects disappear. Everyone in the picture is leaving single file. The time for each such materials has long passed. Like all forms of atavism, our hands are clutching to the grain. Every parade is political. The best go to great lengths to conceal that fact. I fell asleep and I dreamt of the 2nd century, hearing the same music of empire. It requires not just the voice of one, but the brutality of the many. Such sound doesn't generate itself. It comes from a well-defined place, like a train station, where everyone constantly validates their ticket for the next departure to an estate where marble is an adjective for everything. Whether or not your ticket is good, it depends on the conductor's mood. And after so long spent polishing the linoleum here, I wonder how anyone can use the word square.
Thank you, Doug. So yeah, as you alluded to, tell us about the liberation of these texts.
So I, as the bio disclaims, I am a computer science professor. That is a bit of a lie. I teach computer science, but I come to the discipline via art. I have an MFA in poetry, which involved doing computational poetry as my kind of discipline. And I come from a background that deals largely in fair use and reading through texts and writing through texts. So it became sort of a natural thing as I was looking at doing this project, which the afterword talks a little bit about. The note on the text talks about this is a response to Trumpism. And I have some very specific language about that in the book. And it began this around 2016. After the election, I was in a graduate seminar on the Poetics of Space, where of course we read Bachelard's Poetics of Space and others. Wonderful book. If you have not engaged with it, it is frustrating, confusing, and wonderful. But to bring all these threads together, which all seem very disparate, but I promise you they tie together, I use computational methods to acquire my texts. And I read about this particular magazine and was reading a book by David Rivkin that led me to wonder where they were. I wanted to see them. And I wanted to know if they exist. I knew they did not exist in English. I knew that for sure. And I had been experimenting with doing mistranslation of Third Reich Nazi building texts. And I had another project that did that, but I was continuing this because I felt like you can't accurately capture the sort of text or genesis of fascism without really addressing the various mid-century fascisms that all existed. And I found these texts in the Central National Library or National Central Library of Rome. I'm getting the adjectives all funny. Buried in their XML, which is basically like a data language. It just basically structures data. And I said, these look like PDFs. I can scrape them. So I made a robot that went out there and scraped all of the PDFs, turned them into optical character recognition PDFs, which means you can just click and drag over them and the characters look like characters because the computer and machine learning has done at least one good thing. It has made it so that PDFs, if they look like letters, you can basically read the letters. Still gets things wrong, but I think I did that. And I then dumped all of that to a text file and shoved it through the Google Translate API, which is not the front end version, but the back end version, where you have to send things in batches over time. You can't send everything at once. So you have to send it in small batches. And I think each edition or issue took me about, if you would ask me this a year ago, I would have been able to give you the exact number. Each edition took me several hours to get through. So you basically send it little packets of like, here's part of a page, here's the next part of the page, here's the next part of the page. And then it sends you back what it can grok out of that particular fragment you sent it. And I put that together in a big blob, I basically made a corpus of all the words, I think I reduced the duplicates out of it just so that I didn't stumble across duplicates as I was using it as a selective word pool. And then I applied Josh, I didn't know if you asked me about the method, but you're getting the whole method. I applied the golden mean, the sort of standard number of architectural beauty, which has very Italianate references, into choosing the words that I would then create a candidate word pool that I constructed from. So it's not context aware. It is not sequential. It is not necessarily even, paginated correctly, all the language. So who knows where the language comes from the issue? Who knows if it's even the right word? I don't know. but that was the method to getting to at least the word pool that I could then use to say, this is what I heard from the translation or from the process. This is how I choose to order or sequence it. And that was my process for actually arriving at the final materials. Because again, it's a building book essentially. And I wanted to sort of joy in the materials, or the idea of like text being material. And that's always been a central part of my practice, is taking the digital and trying to make it somewhat material. Even though the digital itself is, of course, admittedly material, at least now, when so many things rely upon digital transactions. So I guess that's the full rundown of where this text that I see in front of me, and hopefully you will see in front of you soon, appears.
So you were working on another project that pulled from German text, but I'm curious, was the basis of this in Italian writing? Was there any deeper reason for that being? I guess in my mind, I think of, obviously the futurists came out of Italy, and there was kind of a defining period where the rising fascist movements in Europe kind of each did their own reckoning with avant-garde art. Mm-hmm. And yes. Whereas Germany said, no, degenerate, expressionism, like there was a time in the, early 30s where Germany was saying like, oh, is expressionism? Maybe that's our new thing. Maybe that's a German in character. And then they just, sort of nixed all but a few. And whereas Mussolini in Italy embraced all of that, granted, not wholeheartedly, but he recognized that he wanted those people on his side. And so he would throw out enough words to make them feel like they were at home. So to me, when I think of the sort of what we might call techno-fascism, not the kind that Trump tries to engender, but the kind that might rise from sort of digital libertarianism, to me, jibes so much more closely with what was going on in Italy. So I have to wonder if that was intentional or not.
Sure. So I think there's a couple of threads here that come together that are strange but true. So we cannot separate the fact that clearly, so German fascism, Italian fascism went different directions. Mussolini was very interested in causing conflict between the camps. And in fact, the Italian architectural community, so there were a bunch of traditionalists, but the people that wrote the magazine from which I took the text were part of this thing called the Group of Seven, or the Gruppo Set, which you will see if you read into the Italian architectural history. They were internationalists. They were international style people. They were like modernist with a capital M. They wrote to people like Le Corbusier, and they wrote to these like paragons of what were considered the modernists, or at least we consider them modernists now, not at the time maybe, to come and be part of their thing. And there was architecture and fascism have an extremely tight history in terms of being communicative with one another. I think if a fascist power were to say to a movement or a particular architect, like, yes, you can become our builder, they would have done it. There was a lot of ambivalence and a lot of sloganeering going on. And I think that there was a lot of sympathy toward fascisms in many architectural communities. But let's also not forget, this is a time when poetry was also bound up in this conversation. We're thinking about people like Gabriele D'Annunzio. We're thinking about people like Ezra Pound, who was in Italy at the time. And I was just reading about this actually in preparation for this, because I was wondering if I would talk about it. Ezra Pound at the time, the first poet with a podcast, was essentially doing radio shows that were fascist propaganda fascist, racist propaganda in Italy. And eventually the US was listening and Italy was listening, and they both were somewhat confused about what he was saying. But the Italians paid him at a certain point to make these broadcasts, and they were decidedly toward the kinds of conversations and violence that Italy was into, or at least the fascist regime of Italy was into at the time. But the US ended up actually arresting him, and he spent 12 years in St. Elizabeth's, largely, and also let's not forget the Pisan cantos come from this time too, but he was very involved in the conversation, right? So like the medium that I'm working in also has roots here beyond just the architectural conversation. And there was some level of opportunism that's endemic to all of these different genres and all these different disciplines that come together in this moment to, in the same way that I guess techno libertarianism is in essence a kind of land grab, right? It's a kind of a digital territory staking where you're like a micronation that can do whatever you want, but not really, right? So all these conversations come together in this, even I guess even in my act of what I'm doing, that I feel like I have the right to, or I have the ability to read through these texts. But again, I find these texts not so reprehensible as other ones that come from the time, clearly, but they still trafficked in violence just so they could get the attention of powerful people, and they could become the group. They could become the people that would build the new Italy. And one of the most famous buildings that comes from this group is, so in towns, there was a center called the Casa del Fascio, which was the House of the Fascists that existed, that was like a party headquarters. And one of the most famous buildings that comes out of this group is Giuseppe Tiragni's Casa del Fascio, which is like a modernist thing. It's like travertine and marble and glass. And again, it sort of implicates itself in even what I read, right? There's like all these little pieces about material and glass and marble. And that was like their main building thing. But of course, that's the modernist building rhetoric. I guess the vocabulary of the time was, travertine and all that. So I think, yes, there were clearly differences in the way that all of this went. And I think that, yes, there was more of like I won't call it open market, because it was a very controlled market, a very planned market, but there was a lot of playing off groups against each other. And that turned into rhetoric, that turned into violence, that turned into all sorts of anarchism in a way that was I don't want to say it's non-productive, but it made for a very different climate. And that was what fascinated me so much about this particular story, is that you have all these groups that are participating in these different conversations that are all vying for essentially favor. And that's why this magazine existed. And eventually, when it was clear that that was not going to be the way it went, the magazine just stops. It doesn't really peter out. It just sort of stops after a certain amount of issues in the 30s, I think. And that's just sort of the end of it. And that's just it's a problematic thing in arts of that time, that there were people looking for state sponsorship, clearly. And when they didn't get it, they sort of packed up and went home. And in some conversations, architects that were international in scope, when they approached various powers to become their architect, which is what the Reich had. They had essentially a person that was the central architect, the Reich's architect, who ended up being, it was a couple of people, but at the end, it ended up being Albert Speer. They wanted that. And when they didn't get it, they went elsewhere. And of course, like, you can't have this conversation about talking about Philip Johnson and all the other very big names that we still, to some degree, venerate in some architectural circles, but they have complicated histories. And I think that's an area that I want to investigate more, but it is already pretty well written about. But not to drag on my answer, but it's very complicated and rich, and it's a story that is not told.
Yeah, very, very much so. So I'm curious, and I'm being coy, because we've talked about this before. But you and I are very much kindred spirits with our sort of intersection of technology and poetics and literature. But that's still somewhat rare, and I'm curious how those two things eventually came together for you. Were they always intertwined, or did that come later?
It came at the right time. It came early. I'm lucky. I think I'm lucky to have been able to find something that I can feel as a practice. When I started my publishing career as a book reviews editor for a publication, the Found Poetry Review. Some of you may recognize the magazine. I was the book book reviews editor for that magazine. And we used to hold these things every April they were just projects. And one year it was this thing called the Uli Post, which was Utopian methods, which, if you're not familiar, are basically constrained writing methods that revolve around math games or witty language games. Very, very French, of course, still very French. The goal of the month was to take your local newspaper and do Olympian operations on it and come out with poems at the end of each day. So like 30 different forms, and some of them were like sestinas. So you can imagine how much of a nightmare that is from a newspaper. Like you have to come up with a sestina, which are hard just normally, but that was one of the challenges. And I decided that we could automate this because I spent some time in the IT world after my undergraduate school, before going to graduate school. And I decided we can automate this. And so I developed a set of tools that essentially allowed you just to dump text into this weird editor that wasn't very like good. It was on my personal website. It was just like a text box on a web page. And you could do various things that basically solved the day's problem, not for you, but it assisted you greatly. And other things like Google spreadsheets out there. There's a Sestina spreadsheet that I built for this. There's a Triolet spreadsheet that I built for this, that I was just trying to make things easier for myself. But I realized that in that, it's not just like you invented a word processor. Like that's not what you did. You did something that drastically causes words to collide, to disappear, to reappear in odd places, that developed a sense of meaning for me. And I ended up expanding this into a website that needs tons of love because I need to really pay attention to it again. But I developed this tool called Applied Poetics. It's at appliedpoetics.org. That is very much still, what's the right word for it? It's fragile but willing. It may crash on you. So that's all. That's I guess why the reason I'm saying it may do something you don't expect. That I developed a platform that would implement all these different little things that I would use for my various work, which included taking nouns out of text, which included finding all the colors and writing poems out of the colors in an image that you upload. So you upload a digital image, it scans what colors are there, and it pulls out any text that may have relevance or contain one of those digital colors. Those are just two examples. Or you can play Powerball with the text. So if you put a text in, you click the Powerball, you can basically play the last drawings numbers and Powerball against your text. Someone wants to do it. There's something with the text, the lottery there. But I think there was this like opening up of this idea that I could make these methods and I could make this part of my central practice. And I just never looked back. And thankfully I was at the right time in the right place. And I had people around me that really nurtured and valued these tools. And I ended up, again, going to get my MFA at George Mason. And during that time, everyone there was supportive too of my weirdo practice of like going on Twitter and scraping hashtags and doing all sorts of just interesting experiments. I don't think any of them were really super polished, but I had a lot of support and I had a lot of interest in it. And I think that it's becoming possibly more popular to do. I think there are more people out there. I think of just names like Alison Parrish, Nick Montfort, people that are doing amazing work with what computers can do for grammar, what they can do with interrelated information. So using Wikipedia pages to generate new things based on relationships between Wikipedia pages. The field is still new. And I think that's what's exciting. It's growing. There are more established practitioners. It's still new. So I guess this is my call to say you should do it too. If you feel like you want to have some kind of technical purchase, if you have technical skills or want to develop them, this is a great way to do it because it's just another way of making, it's just a way of picking up a paintbrush or a pencil and just going to work. And I think that was something that I was, again, very lucky that I was fortunate to discover early when I was still kind of developing my practice or developing my poetics. And yeah, that it's just really has driven every project since, even the F-text to some degree, which was written using Photoshop, just completely Photoshop. So finding ways to implement everyday technology in the process of making something, for sure.
Very cool. Well, I'll mention and let you read a few more before we go. That that Rationalism is going to be published as a copyleft text, so it will be further available to take and do what you will with it. I think we're going to work on making some of the tools available, and as Doug mentioned, that the texts of Quadrante are now available on the Internet Archive. So thank you, Doug, for liberating those for us. Yes. So yeah, take us out with a couple more, and then
I
Ellen
got
will
probably
be up next.
just, yep.
Sorry for the leaf blower in the background.
Just about three more, some short ones here. So thank you again for attending. I really appreciate your time and attention, and I look forward to hearing more from other readers and appreciate today's work as well. So Here we go from a little bit earlier than the previous section. Not that linearity matters. How does one make apostles into martyrs? As Paul wrote, choose your own table and persons to your right, then commission a portrait of it. An imagined savior is easier to paint. It has little to say. You can fill it out with your own walls and all kinds of specific furniture, or leave it a skeleton, that place where skin no longer lies. What is the decisive difference between such a symbol and actual wood or cement? One is rhetorically clear. The other creates impatient air. A building means as much as long as it's built. The promise of a miracle does not create sculptures. In every fable, a character dreams of replacing the sun. And it's useless because one can only harvest fields if one has them. But who is prepared to achieve what little typography can? For example, in a crisis, what do you pay attention to? Signs or cops? When the only way to distinguish a truck is to ask if there are any soldiers on board. Like something made of rust, they gather to destroy. A close search of the night revealed nothing but darkness. If there's another crumb in the house, I defy you to find it. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Ellen, I will. No, that was Herb. Sorry, Herb, you don't have to unmute. People keep moving around.
Okay.
Hey, Ellen, how are you?
Good.
Excellent. Ellen, you, as tradition dictates, I'm going to do this again, are a poet and teacher from County Limerick, Ireland. You are the author of several chapbooks, including Heave, which is out from Smithereens Press, Sonnets to Malkmus from Sad Press, Excavate Poems After Pasolini, which came out from Oystercatcher last year. You have, is Actina, is that still forthcoming or is that out now?
Yeah, from Sunday.
Excellent. And released just this past month, Morsel May Sleep is a collection of poems that cleverly builds on Mallarmé's orthographic miscues. I spent a long time coming up with that description. In a sense, you are sort of taking his mishaps and I like to think of them as little stones that you're tripping over them and going off in new directions, sort of daydreaming and free associating from them, and all the while contemplating where language both succeeds and fails in the classroom. Ellen, welcome.
Thank you very much, Josh. And thank you for putting out the book, and thank you, Vic, for editing, and everybody for reading it. So I'm going to start with a few short pieces from the remake section, which starts with little fragments of proverbs from the book itself, and then Mallarmé's own translations of those proverbs, and then goes off in slightly different directions in English and French. And I like what you said, Josh, about the stones to trip over, because that makes every mistake that I will make in this reading look like obviously an integral part of the process and put there on purpose. Okay, so definite article, Morsel May Sleep. Same use of the article with a stronger reason when the word designates an object that is the only one of its species. Rises in the morning, the hand, the lip, the morsel may sleep, all fast in their way. Mind is the man, tongue is the rudder, castles in the air, virtue dwells, pearl of the face, hates a long sermon, fill the mouth with empty spoons. Some rise and some are still. We have different mornings, different shapes within the soft rustlings of these warm rooms. Slips twixt cup, lip, sprinkle coffee drops, but morsels don't sleep. Like rust, they're always crumbling. If we fast for too long, nothing left for thinking with, no drop left in the tank. If tongues rudder, they're steered by novice hands, and often we're adrift. The mind has its tides, and they take us far out. Our words can only dip in where they can and cleave to a current. Pearlescent foam anoints our being washed up on shore, crowns us with stiff sea meringue, fills our mouths with words like sponge and saline. The aftertaste of silver lingers, a residue of privilege, leaving passwords tinged with bitterness. Se lève le matin, la main, la lèvre, morceau peut glisser, se hâte vers leur but. Esprit, c'est l'homme, langue et le gouvernail, château en l'air, vertu réside, la peur du visage et un long sermon. Remplir la bouche avec des cuillères vides. La main se lève, la lèvre laisse glisser la cuillère, un vide dans une bouche vide. Rien ne passera plus ses lèvres. Des mots se hâtent vers leur but, c'est-à-dire un jeu, et le monde s'ouvre. Le ciel s'emplit de châteaux jusqu'à l'horizon. Une barque bricolée de sons dérive sur les courants d'air, gouvernée par la langue qui s'ajuste selon les échos et les réverbérations. Sorry, no, can't read numbers. Indefinite article, walls have. When there is no intention of sharing, du, de la, etc. are not translated. Walls have thorns, cries wine, mad words, eat peas, cherries with the beggar, slight gift, small thanks. Words are leaves, meat, drink and cloth, bread of a day, wine or the priest. When we were small, they used to say the walls had ears. They didn't, but we did, and thirsty ones to drink in every word. For instance, I underheard my mother say she could read my mind in my transparent face. I have gone on believing this into middle age and struggle hard to found myself opaque, especially in meetings when the room can hear my boredom screaming, leaving me and my pile of camouflaging scarves wrung out. Underhearing is a slender gift, not under my direct control. Words make themselves compelling and I open up to them. If I knew which ones would mad me, I could find the trick and pick such ones for classes. There is no rhyme. Time wears out the magic, but it pops up somewhere new. Biology is currently enchanted. Treponema pallidum and voltage-gated ion channels zing with sound potentials. Refuse nicotine me, who balked at fasciola hepatica, would give this soft old science-enchanted creature side-eye and small thanks. Les murs ont des épingles, cris du vent, folles paroles, manger des pois, des cerises avec le mendiant, cadeaux minces, petits remerciements. Les mots sont des feuilles, à boire, à manger et de quoi se vêtir. Pain d'un jour, du vin ou le prêtre. Tous ces mots à bouffer et à cracher en paroles. On se régale de mots comme vin ou pois, cerise ou pain, sont pensés à sa ligne. Quelle joie! Comme le sang en vin et la chair en pain, la feuille du mot se transforme en folle parole, une transsubstantiation embouchée qui s'accomplit son prêtre. Nouns, new dishes beget. The names of male beings are masculine, of female beings feminine, and of objects neutral. Nothing could be simpler. Moon and ship are feminine. Glasses, lasses, brittleware, drudges to die. Words and no deeds never can fill a sack. Salads for asses, no lawyers or foxes. Crosses are ladders, washing of dishes, no witnesses, new appetites. Brittleness is measured by the fingers doing the breaking. Where the drudgery of crumbling and accounting for the crumbs ends, I will be waiting, shining like freshly washed up dishes. Words are not deeds, but also not nothing, not filling, but not ending. Extending into the space around us, they come to place us. A cocoon is a thing within such deeds as metamorphoses make place. Les fillettes et les vers, un bien très fragile, meurent pauvres airs, paroles et pas d'actes ne peuvent remplir un sac, de la salade pour les ânes, ni homme de loi ni renard. Les croix sont des échelles. Lavez les plats, pas de témoins, un nouvel appétit. La rime abîme et me vexe. Sans calque, on aurait pu mettre vaisselle à la place plat, donc vaisselle échelle. Quelle beauté croisée jamais par le reflet trompeur d'un faux ami. Bon appétit les fillettes. Remplissez vos sacs à l'abri du regard d'hommes de loi et de renards. Vous êtes bien, mais point fragile du tout. Joignez vos paroles aux actes. Passez son témoin. Nouns, you house to fright. Several very common words keep their Saxon plural. Err on the side of clarifying the sound. Teeth are longer. Dead lice dropped out. Devil is in dice. Catches no mice. Eats the king's geese. Burn not you house to fright away the mice. 2 pence got. Thinks his own geese swans. Never show your teeth. Our devil was always in the detail, but Stefan can't stay away from dice. Rambo's sisters got the worst of the lice out and crushed them in frail fingers, but 1 or 2 will always make it through, to drop or worse still hop about. These lines teem with geese. You'd wonder how many lessons it needs to clarify teeth, mice and geese. They're fossils more than rules, like circumflexing. Les dents sont plus longues. Il tombait de lui des poux morts. Le diable est dans les dés. N'attrape pas de souris. Mange les oies du roi. Ne brûlez pas votre maison pour effrayer les souris. 2 pennies de gagné. Croit ses propres oies des cygnes. Ne montrez jamais les dents. Je trouvais toujours bien logique le verbe attraper avant de me rendre compte qu'un trap en français est un piège. Apiégeons donc des souris effrayées et des pigeons. Écoutez comment ça rime encore. On croirait ses propres oies des rois des cygnes. Le diable jette ses dés et les dents longues se cachent. Okay, and that's it from the remake section.
Thank you. So we've talked a little bit about the origins of Morsel a few times, both I think in some of the marketing copy or your note at the end of the text, as well as the interview that is online on our blog right now and appeared in the last issue of Firmament. So I'm going to throw you a curveball and say, tell me about bog butter.
Oh yeah, bog butter. Okay, so the word obsession has cropped up a few times this evening, and I am very much a writer who is just seized by obsessions, and that is what I follow, and I just, write until there's nothing left to write. And just after I had sent off the manuscript for Morsel May Sleep to yourselves, and I was like in that horrible fizzy, fidgety place that you're in when you're finished one work, kids calling for butter. I just had a few tweets and a few different things came together about butter and the history of butter in Ireland, and what prism, okay, sorry, butter can't really be a prism, but like what an amazing way it was of understanding so many different aspects of Ireland's history, of colonization, and being dragged kicking and screaming into capitalism, and various movements like demographic displacements and aspects of Irish culture just made so much sense when you thought about them with butter, and so that's the obsession that assailed me after I finished with Morsel May Sleep. Bog butter is part of it, but like, my dad was a creamery manager when I was a kid. He went back to train as a teacher later on in life, but he was a creamery manager, like with small creameries where like farmers would bring actual churns of milk. I'm really revealing my age here now. And before it was even amalgamated and turned into a factory. So like that idea of butter as being like something that our part of Ireland is almost literally built on was, there from my childhood. So yeah, so this book came out of that, and it literally came, it was like this time last year, it was like being invaded by, blocks of saturated fat for like 4 months, and just all of these different texts that I was manually scraping, not anything fancy or technological, for references to butter and butter's history. And like it went back to like really old, like bardic satires from there up to like the most fucking grotesque, excuse my French, grotesque, abuses of language that are used in modern corporate speak to justify things that are absolutely vile. So yeah, so it turned out like 30,000 words of like completely strange and unexpected butter. Yeah. Sorry, that was a very incoherent sentence.
I know better than to ask anyone, and especially a poet, where their obsessions come from. But I'm curious. Morsel is something I use the stones analogy very purposefully in introducing it, because something when I'm reading as an editor, or even just as a casual reader, though I try not to do the two in the same mindset. I often talk about when I send feedback to a writer that I tripped over this. Like, I tripped over something in this sentence that might be a little awkward as I read it, and I like to use that phrase. And I could see that in reading this particular book, the Mallarmé grammar textbook, essentially. That those things, is that sort of how the idea came about? You kept reading. Does he really mean Morsel May Sleep? And you took off from there, or was there something more else there that grabbed your eye?
Yeah, well, it was just kind of a confluence of I don't blame him for the Morsel May Sleep. Well, maybe I should, but I don't really, because like in the original text that he was basically cribbing from, like, so none of his translations or his proverbs are original, so he's cribbing from this book of proverbs. So I think he would have been taking them. I have a copy of it someplace, but I haven't spent much time with it. He would have been taking them verbatim from there, and then he would have been translating them into French. And there are lots of typos and little mistakes that have snuck into the English versions, and giving him some credit, I think maybe those entered the food chain further down the link than him, because he would have been just taking them from where they were. But Peter Manson told me after this, when we were chatting about it, when he read the book after I'd finished the first draft, that a lot of the proverbs in that book that Mallarmé was using as his source were actually taken from French originally in the first place. So whoever wrote this first book, who I should know, and it's back there somewhere, but he translated them into French. Sorry, he translated them into English from French, and then Mallarmé took them and translated them back into French for classroom exercises. So it's an actually mind-blowing wheels within over and back and forward, and all the different slippages that happen at every step along the way, because translation is always imperfect and things always fall out or fall in, or you end up putting things in there that weren't there in the first place, because that's what you happen to be obsessed with or whatever. So that was part of it. And then another aspect of it is that I had just started, I took a couple of years away from secondary school teaching to finish my PhD, and just had gone back to secondary school and was teaching in a new school when I started reading that Mallarmé classroom book, and just thinking about his classroom and my own classroom, and just thinking about some of the things, so his pedagogical material, some of the books, like the nursery rhymes one is another thing which Ashbury has translated, as somebody who spends a lot of my workday in a classroom with teenagers, and I know what that is like, the idea that you would bring these things into a class full of 16, 17, but a catastrophic shambles is just amazing to me. And I just can't, I find myself imagining, because he was not a good teacher and he didn't enjoy teaching, and I'm just imagining how these things lived briefly and died horribly in actual classrooms.
Is there anything positive to learn from him as a teacher, or is it all negative examples?
No, I don't think it's all negativity at all. I think there's something really endearing, and it's a strange, I have an odd relationship with him anyway. His poetry is just so him as a teacher is so far from him as a poet. It's just a completely different. But no, there's a lot of of like love for the language, and like a very unusual for his time kind of a ludic, playful attitude towards language, like, you know, and kind of ideas that are much more part of teaching and part of what we do in the classroom now, as opposed to just drilling grammar rules into people. Like even the logic behind his grammar book is discovery learning. It's like by reading these proverbs, students will learn by themselves kind of organically what the different rules of English grammar are. So it was like very, 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 very far ahead of his time. But I can't imagine it having, you know, lived a happy life in real life in the classroom.
Do you want to take us out with a few more from, I think it was a different again?
Yeah, so what I will read now are from the second section, which is versions, which reworks the some of the poems from the first section. And so I'm just going to read a couple from that, and then I will read the final long poem, the English final long poem, which is called Melt Song. Underwater, famine means that the green fronds we drift through aren't nourishing. The love and radical solidarity of pirates governs a ship better than firm discipline. This rocky time is not made for orders from on high. Only working together works. Not a pyramid or bureaucratic quadrilateral. Vague shapes made by movement and time bring all things to pass. At the window, the cat peers, waiting for her husband home from the sea, wisdo in age, composite of wisdom and widowhood, keeps mother and daughter separated in individualized griefs, makes want seem impenetrably self-contained. Time makes virtue shine. In time, these acts will become legible and shine out, neon words to split the night sky and be recalled if poorly spelled. Green pond scum of the veg patch makes no pottage. Time to mulch it over and start over underwater. Sous l'eau, la famine nous mène à se déguster. Cela n'est pas une solution durable. Celui qui gouverne un navire devrait rester conscient du fait que le temps est le seul vrai gouvernail. On le suit sans savoir où il nous mène. Les forces motrices et les temps font arriver toutes choses malgré notre sentiment de pouvoir. On ne peut rien. L'illusion de sagesse dans le vieillage n'est que l'avant-propos de la mort. Le lien étroit entre mère et fils s'efface au fur et à mesure. L'amour fait le besoin. En secret, s'entrecrée, en secret de ses propres vides. Le vide fait briller la vertu et cache l'espace de laquelle elle est née. Dans le noir, on ne peut rappeler ni la chanson ni les paroles. Il ne nous reste que le rythme. Pas de pain, point de potage, que de l'eau sous l'eau. Rises in the morning, sunny side at least halfway up. May God have mercy on all our souls now, snug in the hollow of the hand, poised under the lip the morsel may sleep, totally oblivious to its coming tumble. We know this should be a slip. Tongues, all fast in their way, slip up and leave us adrift between meanings. They think mind is the man, but we know it is body and tongue is the rudder. Our steering implements are slipping up though, and the navigational instruments need recalibrating. We were headed for castles in the air, where legend tells that virtue dwells, but we lost our way and ways belonging to several others too. Our disgrace will outlive us. The pearl of the face, the one eye left between us, has rolled right back into a single cranium. This whole body hates a long sermon, so much hot air claiming to fill the mouth with empty spoons. Our hope revels in hollowness and rises. L'espoir se lève le matin dans l'oubli de la journée précédente. La main s'approche de la lèvre, sachant que le morceau peut glisser dans le plus petit creux. Les membres se hâtent vers leur but, réunis sous les ordres sous-entendus de ce chef présomptueux, esprit. C'est l'homme qui se désigne ainsi. On sait pourtant que la langue est le gouvernail et que l'esprit suit ses tournures et ses locutions. On le sait mais certains membres persistent dans la recherche de châteaux en l'air, où on persiste à dire que la vertu réside sans corps, ni haleine, ni but, ni espoir. Elle dort, si une abstraction incorporelle peut faire ça, et la perle du visage reste cachée de nos yeux. Tout comme nous, elle est un long serment et reste convaincue qu'il est impossible d'emplir la bouche avec des cuillères vides. Elle dort en dehors de l'espoir. Melt song. Words and no deeds never can fill a sack, only slump glumly alongside an empty one, waiting to be picked up and brandished or bundled. We live on the far side of where the animals are now, so sometimes we must play the fox, vex boatmen with their sacks of grain and poultry, trick gingerbread men, set all at 6s and 7s amongst the doomsday chickens. We've been taught to count our worth in baked goods and dairy. 5 loaves a penny tells us it's a buyer's market, set to make fat wolves of the prowling boyos. Owl thinks her young too good for the mess of hormone and ritual, clogging the air in the rooms where we go for schooling, to learn our place and how to move in it. She still thinks they will learn wisdom by the follies of others, fly without falling or failing. But if women conceal all, or conspire to hide the tangling links or chains of stops and starts that string together in learning any single thing, children stand quiet, still, and quite vacant. Dead lice dropped out of their feathered heads once and were just left unremarked and uneaten. If she is right that the devil is in dice, the sin is in the rolling. Every deed seeds 5 other chains of movement, one of stasis. Each word chosen leaves others adrift to clog the air with their 6-legged corpses. Idle people take this so much to heart it stops them in their tracks. Words just know who is afraid to use them. So the ones who think silk makes the difference between fitting in and falling out will find it is not, in the end, the feeling, but the movement, the reaching that shakes them out of silence, sends them stumbling and shivering to the world's end and beyond. Swarms of paper wasps haunt these roiling plains, copper-coloured live ones, come in pudding time to feed on molten sugar and sting us into singing. Okay, that's me. Thank you very much.
Ellen, thank you so much. Morsel May Sleep is out right now. You can grab it from our website and soon from many fine booksellers. All right. SD Chrostowska is our next reader. Are you able to unmute? So yes.
Yes. Hello. Hello, everyone who is here, and of course I can't see everyone, but that's quite. I'm quite used to not seeing anyone in these meetings except for myself, as I'm a teacher as well.
Well, welcome. I'm glad you could join us all the way from Paris. SD Chrostowska is an author and scholar. Her works of fiction include Permission from Dalkey Archive, Matches, a Light Book from Punctum Books, The Eyelid from Coach House. On the nonfiction scholarly side of things, you are the co-editor of Political Uses of Utopia, author of Literature on Trial, The Emergence of Critical Discourse in Germany, Poland, and Russia. 1700 to 1800, and the author of the forthcoming Utopia in the Age of Survival Between Myth and Politics. Your most recent and most pertinent for this meeting book is A Cage for Every Child, which is a book of short stories, a book of assemblages of really just effortlessly conjured worlds, provocative, enigmatic. There's an idea at the core of every one of these stories, but if you try to get too close to it, it will likely disappear out from under you. This was published back in May, which, as pandemic time has it, feels like an age ago. Sylvia, welcome.
Yes, thank you so much. And I really enjoyed the readings that came before, and I saw lots of lots of connections, obviously, the forms. And even though I don't really have a sort of special method or a special source of inspiration for this collection that you published and you were so kind to publish, it's very hard, of course, to be published these days, and especially in a year like this one and last year. So you worked tirelessly with me on this, and with so many other brilliant people that are part of your stable now. And so I of course think over these stories and think that there are many different forms that I now see that you really appreciate also others. I was thinking especially of Alexandra's footnotes and the sort of pseudo-scientific that creeps in, and sort of a creative rewriting of scientific language. And when you were reading, Alexandra, I thought of the theory of the parasite by Fabre, who is a French naturalist. I don't know if you know the theory of the parasite. It's just a chapter. Yeah. So thanks for that, Josh. It's great to be meeting with everyone across time zones.
Yes, I have my themes and fixations, so somehow we all make sense together. It's a nice little family.
Yes. So I have prepared a few things, a few pieces, and I know you asked me actually for these particular ones, so I'm complying. Maybe not in the order that you asked me, but I don't know if you want me to read all of them or stop after the short ones and then.
Yeah, why don't we read a couple and then we'll chat for a few and read a couple more.
Sounds good. So the first one I'll read is called Burn. I discovered a severe burn on my hand. A day later, it burgeoned into a flower. So I picked it without severing the stem, pulling hard to uproot the bulb. What was this gift to myself? I was unsure. The decision to ask my neighbor came naturally. At her door, a face emerged, covered with sweat, and a thimbled hand beckoned me to enter. As always, she had that knightly demeanor. Her many crusades graced the fabrics strewn across the floor to which she was giving shape. She stood before me entire, her head crowned with needles, her hair the texture and smell of wet wool, her stitching giving somewhat at the hips. She was a portly woman, and smiled. Her lips parting slightly, out fell 2 silver fillings. I knew not if this was my welcome. It must have been, for she pulled over a chair for me and herself reclined on the velour sofa. Comfortable in her presence, I told her of my blossoming wound. She asked to see the flower. It had withered, its silken petals stained by rot. Tears flowed down her chiffon cheeks. She claimed she understood everything. This was a flower of death, a portent. You have only 1 day to live. Had you cut it, you would have lived long enough to want to die. Had you been left a choice, you would have died by your own hand. I did not question her further. Who would have thought? I was in the flower of youth. What was worse, I had nothing planned. It was raining, and I too could cry. I collected myself, however, got up, and made for the door. Was this the end? How would I go? This death had nothing of the clarity I expected. So that's Burn. And the next one I'm going to read is called Black Venus. We journeyed to the deepest heart of Africa to see the black Venus on view there. They said that she resembled the Venus de Milo, whom we had just seen. The facility where she was kept was in mourning. The staff wore black instead of their usual. We approached her, upright on her bed, bare from the waist up. Though she was young and slender, her breasts were ripe and full. Contrary to what we were led to expect, there was no viper attached at her bosom. She nursed instead a baby boy and made, in fact, a very good black Madonna. The baby's right leg was lopped off at the knee. She had herself been damaged in the attack, an explosion several days earlier. They were caught in a war of liberation. Beauty, someone said, is always the first victim of war. Though exposed and visibly distressed, she seemed resigned to being maimed and sought no contact with us. The shapely scarlet stub at her right shoulder again reminded us of Venus. She would be discharged and returned to her village shortly. So I'll stop there for a moment and.
Sure. So the thing that's I've always enjoyed about your writing, because I came to it through matches because we publish with the same publisher, Punctum Books, and then Permission, and then I got a chance to read The Eyelid early on. How intertwined these works are with their form. Permission being a sort of one-sided epistolary work, matches the various forms, but the short writing, the prose poem, the aphorism, and then The Eyelid being almost a sort of Voltairean satire. Where in the process are you kind of are you finding your form, to borrow from, I guess, William Gass? Does the container sort of precede the contents, or do those things sort of co-develop?
Oh, I think they're very organic in their development, and I won't say that the form finds the content, because that's not true either. Although sometimes, of course, I'm inspired by writing, as everyone is, that I read, and in that sense, I'm sure that what I write takes on the colors of that writing, but it's not a form that I try to adapt. That I try to find contents for, even if I'm aware that there is a particular style that I appreciate in someone else. I think, I think a lot of what I write just comes from a sentence, or sometimes from dreams, and that's it's the sentence that then guides me to a form, and usually because I find I don't have enough time to write, or if I didn't have enough time to write for many years. These are short forms, even though they end up being quite voluminous. It's still short. My attention span seems to be ideally suited to those forms. But in this collection, there are longer stories, and these are stories that have not been published before, the longest ones, in fact, and those are the most recent. So I've tried to spend more time simply developing a plot and developing ideas within a longer narrative structure, which for many would still be rather pared down, based on compared to other writing, that other short stories that are being published, contemporary writers, even experimental ones. But that's the best I can do in terms of length, is about 20 pages, and that's what this collection contains.
I'm curious. You mentioned lines from dreams, which makes me want to ask about your connection with surrealism, both in enjoying the past and present of it, and if that plays any role in your process or informs it in any way.
Well, in terms of surrealism, so there is the historical surrealism, and the idea is that it ended in the late 60s. But then there are, of course, surrealists who are working today. They constitute groups in many continents. They're very active in publishing, and so there is quite a large international surrealist scene, to which I'm sort of plugged in, but I would say I'm really on the margins of that world. And when someone says that something I write, isn't surrealist, then I immediately bristle, because I think, well, this person just doesn't understand what surrealism is, and that is an approach that is obviously very much in tune with the unconscious, with dreams, with chance, with coincidences. In everyday life, it's not a style. It's not a recognizable style that is or isn't surrealist. It's something that is, something like a spider spins out of itself, and it then the tissue itself is dreamlike, is oniric, or is to some extent illogical, and willfully so. It doesn't conform, doesn't tidy itself up into a logical composition, whether it's painting or writing.
Why don't you read a couple more? Do you want to do the mousetrap in this batch, and then we can talk about the story behind that?
Yeah, I will read the mousetrap. In the story tentatively entitled The Mousetrap, a celebrated author is approached by one of his admirers. It is a sunny Sunday in the park, and he is alone, sipping a Scarlet O'Hara, a favorite summer cocktail made with Southern comfort, which always conjures up for him the scene from the film Gone with the Wind, when a human nutcracker threatens to smash the heroine's head like a walnut. But never mind. The admiring reader, whom the author invites to join him, immediately launches into immoderate praise. To call it immoderate does not do it justice. The author, past his prime, is at the peak of his vanity. Where he less so, he would turn the conversation around, away from himself, steering it towards another subject, an obvious one being the recent pandemic. Rare is the writer who is alive to this fatal weakness and satisfied with the quantity and quality of fan mail. Here was praise delivered in person, and he was not about to send it back. Be that as it may, the famous author drinks in the dithyrambs concerning his books, effusions entirely spontaneous and, for that reason, exceedingly gratifying. Their effect on him borders on intoxication, and to be fair, the reader's adulation could almost qualify as amorous. Another drink seems in order. The author, all courtesy, does not neglect to ask the reader if she would like anything. What are you drinking? But the reader, who is not particularly thirsty, politely declines. No sooner is the replenished and sweaty glass placed between them on the table, the cocktail napkin hovering like a cloud in its polished steel surface reflected sky, then the reader floods the author with questions about his characters, and the craft of writing. Her enthusiasm having reached a fever pitch, the requests pour forth from the reader's mouth without pausing for answers. The author wonders what he is in for, which is more likely, a confession or a paroxysm. The reader's excitable nature suggests the latter, but her long-windedness could be a sign of timidity. She does have something of the mouse about her, and embarrassment about getting to the point. Suddenly, without warning, it is out. The reader has, for the longest time, had only one wish in life, to write a story that would be worthy of her beloved author. Were she even to pen just one such short story, she would die happy. Could writing like this be taught? Could the author explain how one goes about creating something so wonderful? The author, still flattered but also flustered, inspects his fingernails as he reflects. At length, his face lights up. Just now, while you were speaking, a title came into my head, The Mousetrap. Then an idea for a story. I was about to make a mental note of it when you paid me the compliment of asking me to teach you to write, and I forgot all about my idea. If you can help me recall it, I realize I'm asking for the impossible, but then so are you. And if I am satisfied with your answer, making sure this time to note it down, your wish will have been granted. I will have taught you, despite my complete ignorance in the matter, how to come up with a perfectly good story, worthy of me, a story of which I could claim authorship. All you really need is the idea. As you heard me say, I consider the actual writing, the execution, to be secondary. At this proposal of an object lesson, the author thinks he sees the reader's face change color and assume a befuddled expression. She looks up searchingly into his sky blue eyes as if his thoughts could be divined from them. She calls over a waiter and orders 2 Scarlet O'Haras. She drains each glass to the last drop as nearby children are playing. The longer she is silent, the clearer it becomes that she is utterly at a loss, once more, only more than ever in awe of her favorite author's ingenuity. Meanwhile, a small dog is fondly strangled. The author, whose mind is always several steps ahead of his fans, especially when he is tipsy and idle, and at his most creative, sees that his baiting of the reader is to no avail. As a tear burst attains the table in microscopic droplets and his ears pick up crying that fails to resuscitate, he changes tack, taking the lead firmly yet gently. Let me tell you what I would put in the mousetrap. Maybe then you will make up an ending for us. Wouldn't that be enough to make you happy? In my story, I tried to lure you into a trap. The original idea for it escaped me, and I'm looking for a suitable replacement. The bait is my forgetfulness, which, as you can tell, is genuine, but you do not let yourself be caught. As I see it, there are 3 possible interpretations. Either I am a bad teacher, or you are a bad student, or the mousetrap is a lousy excuse for a story. Is there a 4th option that I'm not seeing? Here he pauses for added suspense. Of course, we're not done yet. There is no story bad enough that it can't be redeemed by a good ending. The reader's reaction is difficult to read. She seems to mull over the opportunity to end it. Still, she says nothing. She might be shy, it is hard to say, smiling meekly as she excuses herself. As she stands up, her body casts a shadow across the table and the author's hands and face. She gestures to the restroom sign pointing toward the restaurant. On her way, she passes the smothered puppy and sniveling, kissable, blonde-headed innocents. The author, waiting for her return, orders another cocktail. He knows he is no longer a gentleman, but what with the afternoon heat and the languor pervading every fiber of his being, he has no desire to get up. Some 20 minutes pass without incident. The author begins to entertain the possibility that the reader is not coming back. I hope she at least paid the 2 rounds and didn't leave me to foot the bill, he fumes, rather peeved at having been abandoned. But thinking back on the mousetrap, the story he fabricated on the spot, he rates his overall satisfaction with the encounter as high. He is compelled to recognize that the reader did, in fact, supply the story with a worthy ending. With the children distracted, the dead puppy can now be discreetly bagged. She may have gotten away, but if she had stayed, she would have fallen into my trap, no question. Discovering that she could creatively rival her idol would have killed her love for my books. It's better this way. I'll avenge myself for her impoliteness by stealing from her, he says to himself contentedly. This petty and candid plagiarism obliges him to admit that for the first time in his life, a reader outdid him. He could never have come up with a better ending for something as ad lib as the mousetrap. Of course, she didn't actually know what she had done. It may have been at her expense, but he is happy with the outcome. And by an agile mental pirouette, surprising in a mind in so torpid a condition, he does, in the end, congratulate himself on being a good teacher, on having a good student, and on making up such excellent stories.
Thank you. So this was kind of a late edition. This wasn't in the first version of the collection that you sent me, but I was very enthusiastic about including it. There's a sense of foreboding over it in a sense. It reminded me, I think, a little of maybe some of Flannery O'Connor's stories, where you're expecting, I guess, something that never quite happens. But the story itself has an interesting genesis. Do you want to share that with the listening public?
I'm not sure it has actually. Maybe I've misled you, Josh, when we spoke about it. Maybe I tried to sell it, and you got the impression that that was interesting.
You're a writer. You're selling me stories. That's what you do.
Yeah. And so the genesis is in a dream. In fact, the title comes from a dream, and me trying to tell the story to a friend over Zoom, of course, as we often do these days, and me having in the process of telling, and I did not do this upon just waking up, but later in the day, forgetting in fact what was in the story. So I had the title, but I'd completely forgotten the content. I was very frustrated, and it sort of it hindered the conversation from developing. And I was adamant that this friend who admires my writing, rather maybe not my writing, but the ideas for my stories, especially, wanted to find out how I write. Can I come up with these stories? And so I said, if you tell me what I forgot, then I could help. But that's the condition. and eventually, the next day, I sent him a draft of the story as a kind of email jokey email, and as a kind of plea for help also, because I still hoped that he would somehow divine what it was that connected this title to maybe the reality which we were sort of sharing, the pandemic and all this. So the pandemic is there for a reason as well.
There does seem to be something I've admired about your writing is I get the sense there are some that some of the pieces in here could very much happen in today's world. But a lot of them, even some of the very short ones, I think of something like The Marketplace of Souls, seems to be an encapsulated world of its own. And I've admired your ability to suggest the rules of another world without necessarily very much language, without going into the process of world building. I'm curious, do you see that in your own work? Are you when that first line suggests itself, or the motif or the idea, do you start sort of constructing a world with rules around it?
Well, that's a very difficult task, actually, constructing a credible world. And I think the reason why I've for so long shied away from longer fictional pieces that actually have a sort of world and characters that have distinct voices and patterns of thinking is because I simply didn't know how to do it. I couldn't do it. But gradually, little by little, I guess I taught myself to develop these worlds. So it's the collection. This collection is interesting for me because it shows my development, but they're not chronologically arranged, the stories. So you really can't see which one's the earliest. I can tell you the earliest in terms of the idea is the idea. And that's an idea that I had noted down when I was an adolescent, and then I gradually developed it into what it is today. But with these kinds of things, it takes time, and it also takes, as I said, reading, and it helped me enormously to read short stories, like the the usual suspects, Borges and Kafka, who with little language, and Robert Walser, who with little language managed to conjure something like an atmosphere, an ambience, and a world with its shadows, with its enigmas, with its sort of mysteries, the things that are unspoken, that work to make the story productive for meaning, to use a kind of crude expression, but to be interpretable and potentially infinitely in the case of Kafka's stories, which are more oniric, right, than a lot of what Borges has left us.
There does seem to be, I mean, you're an academic, you're a teacher, you have books of nonfiction. If someone is interested in your ideas and thoughts, they can certainly track those things down. But I note that they're slippery in your fiction. I mean, you're not coming out, you're not a polemic writer by any stretch of the imagination, but they do seem almost designed, we'll say, to ideologically unsettle the reader, to just make them entertain an idea that's outside of their comfort zone rather than telling them what to think. Is that a fairly accurate description?
Well, do you mean that that there are ideas in my work that I sort of try to push on the reader in ways that are not conventional, but that there are still sort of ideas that relate to the, maybe critically to the that's what you're getting at?
Well, I think, I mean, you're not even trying to maybe slyly get people, to voice ideas on people, but the fiction at least seems more about getting them to, break out of a comfort zone, to entertain ideas and worlds and possibilities and states of affairs that they otherwise might not. But it's not a place for polemization, whether hidden or not.
Yeah, I would say that my sort of day job certainly bleeds into my fiction, and that I have a critical spirit, I suppose, and that critical spirit is in some of the more recent longer stories is something I don't hide. But in the earlier ones, there are the subject of death, I think, is disturbing to many people, and it's something that I've always thought about and written about, and had even projects at some point to write about in book length. So that's a topic that I'm continually working and reworking. But as for not being polemical, wait till you read my book on Utopia. This is completely, this was a book that was a hard sell at the press, precisely because it was very polemical. So it's also I think a question of the audience, and the audience for fiction. I think I'm just at the limit of what what can be what ideas I can include in fiction without putting the reader off by sort of didacticism. I certainly don't want to do that, and so there's a lot of margin, I think, in things like Eyelid, where the reader can decide on what side they're on, because I'm and not be pushed by me because it's not clear on what side I'm on politically or critically.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a better summation. Is it's not necessarily always clear, and I think in an entertaining way, what side you're coming down on, what your viewpoint is, but they're making us, at least the stories are leading us to consider things in a way that's more open-ended. The book you reference is Utopian: The Age of Survival Between Myth and Politics, and that's out from Stanford, I believe, this October.
Yes. Yeah, thanks
Excellent.
for keeping track of that.
try. I'm a fan.
Well, you'll see. It's very polemical. Should I read another short piece? I know we're almost at the end.
Yeah, why don't we close out with reading a couple more pieces? We'll end on a high note, so I'll go ahead and preempt that by saying thank you everyone for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's always great to sort of both have some strangers and also get the band together, so to speak. So I'm excited about all the forthcoming books. We've got Rationalism, like I said, from Doug Luman later this fall. Alexandra's book is out next fall. Your book, Sylvia, came out in May. Ellen's book came out last month. So it's an absolute pleasure to work on these things, to talk about them with you all. Sylvia, why don't you take us out?
Okay, so I'll read the first story in the collection, which is called The Great Indoors. A pack of dogs baying senseless in the distance, a hunting party cutting to the chase, firing, 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 their madness fading away, gaining again in bloodlust bred by innocent sport. Below lay the Provençal village, both colony and museum. Resident art students filled it not as shadows, but as apparitions, destroyed only by turning a corner and shaking out your head. They exhibited all the preoccupations and gestures of young people from elsewhere. They called to each other their projects and plans. They streamed into and out of studios. They set out on hikes and plein air outings, played boule and talked American films. They confided to absent family, present friends, sat crying upon stoops or sobbed in each other's arms, made love together or came alone under the chateau, whose ruin sat crookedly upon the hill like a crown, and in the artistic freedom of their boredom, so well provided for, entertained also fantasies of captivity, slavery, and suicide. In their isolation, they were on display, as if rehearsing some intricate work of outdoor theater, confined only by this village hollow. They had no secrets. Every erosive whisper was etched in stone immediately and forever. They knew this and added more soul to their performance. Their bodies lingered, vanishing only when you, who glimpsed them vivid and felt their breath inside your ear, vanished first. They never saw you. They would sooner take you for two stones, perfectly round, perfectly inert, striking each other with a dull sound in a game just abandoned. And here, where you have withdrawn again to reflect, here too you have no peace. Here too you cannot remain still and quiet. Here your work is cut out for you, sensations polished into facets of experience, or suppressed, washed off and flushed away, or mixed with dirt and buried somewhere. Trees sway and birds creak. Scorpions have at least as many eyes as you do. A bee weighs more than a pebble. A cat is a garden tiger. Lizards make fine afternoon dragons. Ants caravan, and the feast of flies upon a mole carcass models a circle of friends. Only much later, in the last cobweb days of October, will you notice the little village children, those below the knee, left by their mothers at Café de Sade before the unhung portrait of a dead philosopher. They too never still and quiet, their faces gay with discovery, their work immense. So I will finish there, and thanks very much everyone for being here, and thanks Josh again for organizing this wonderful meeting, and enjoy the summer.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for attending.
Thank you. Bye-bye.